I want to again welcome each and every one of you here to our services at the Manhattan Church of Christ. For visitors, again, welcome. And stick around afterwards. I hear we have a baptism that's going to be coming up. Pretty exciting time. So please stick around for that, and then stick around after that so we can get to know you a little bit and visit with you. As I was preparing for this lesson, I was given the topic about wise people and the pitfalls of immorality. And as I began to study, there's 3 chapters that I was given in the book of Proverbs. Chapters 5, 6, and 7. Now, as we've been going through the book of Proverbs, we have seen a lot of things. One of the things is that Proverbs puts an emphasis on seeking wisdom and understanding. Well, as I read through these 5 chapters, man, there was a lot of stuff that was in there. A lot about wisdom, about staying away from immorality. So today, we're not going to be able to get through everything that is in these 3 chapters. So I'm going to give you an overview, basically, of what's in these chapters. And again, Proverbs encourages seeking out wisdom, but it also gives many warnings to the readers about heeding these teachings and about wisdom. Over and over as we read, the key point in all of Proverbs is looking for wisdom and avoiding folly. And as the writers, the most prominent, of course, would be Solomon. As he was writing these things down, he was saying, put these things into practice. Heed what I'm telling you so that it'll end up going well for you and you can avoid foolish things. And another thing that these verses do is they give us examples of what can happen if we don't listen and keep the commands or teachings or the wisdom that's given to us. And what I found as I was studying is that there's a genius in this narrative metaphor that's going to be used in these chapters. In that it uses a particular case of folly, and in the cases that we'll be looking at, it's adultery, in order to teach lessons about wisdom in general. And I'll say that again, the genius about this narrative metaphor is that it uses a particular case of folly in order to teach lessons about wisdom in general. Now, the warnings that we find in chapters 5 and 7, these warnings right there at the beginning of the chapter. Things like, listen to my wisdom. Listen to me and don't turn aside from my words. Avoid the way of pledges, sluggards, and scoundrels. Keep my words. Store up my commands. Bind them on your fingers and write them on the tablet of your heart. So as we can see, the teacher here is begging us, listen to what I'm telling you. Please listen to this wisdom. And I find it interesting that there's a parallel on that last little piece there where it says, bind them on your fingers and write them on the tablets of your heart. Now, if you remember, way back when Moses was given the law, one of the things God said is, I want you to talk about these commands. Teach them to your children. Bind them on your wrist. Bind them on your foreheads, so you will always have them. So what the teacher here is saying is, do the same thing, but also write them on your hearts so that they'll be with you always. So now we get into chapter 5. And what we see now is a description. This is where this narrative metaphor begins. And it starts giving us a description of an adulteress. First thing it says is that her lips drip honey. Now, we all know that honey tastes pretty sweet. Most of us like the taste of honey or things that are sweet. So, what the teacher here is saying is, yeah, what she's saying is just like honey, just as sweet. As a matter of fact, her words and her speech are smooth as oil. And we all know how oil can make things glide smoothly. If we have a door that's creaking, what do? Put a little oil on it so that it can go smoothly. And it's the same with this adulteress. But, and I put that in big letters, but, you got to watch out. You got to be careful because in the end, she is just like bitter gall. Now, me, I've never tasted gall. And I don't know if anybody here has tasted, but I'm sure we have all tasted something that was really, really bitter. So we can think about that. And that's what the teacher here is saying. He's saying she's just like this bitterness. And she's also as sharp as a two-edged sword. And what this means is that she has the capability of cutting you down to shreds, basically destroying you. And her feet lead straight to death, and her steps lead straight to the grave. I mean, that's a pretty powerful image if you think about it. So if you start chasing after her, guess what? Where are you going to end up? So the teacher continues. He also says that her paths are crooked. And what do we know about crooked paths? We're to avoid them, aren't we? Aren't we commanded to seek out the narrow way and the narrow gate that's straight? So the teacher knew what he was talking about here in giving us this warnings. Now, if we flip over to chapter 7, we get a more vivid picture of what this adulteress is really like. In chapter 7, she gains a voice, and you can actually read the words that she uses. And she uses these words to bring down a young man. Because what we have here is, in chapter 5, he said, this is what the adulteress looks like. This is what she does. And then in chapter 7, he gives an example of something that he witnessed. A young man on his way to his destruction. Another thing is that she dresses like a prostitute and brazenly or boldly comes up to the young man and kisses him in front of everybody. And this adulteress is not the wife of this young man. As a matter of fact, in her words, she even said her husband is not home. Come on. And she entices him to get him to come into her house. She's also defiant and loud. And her feet, they never stay in one place. One moment she's over here. And then the next moment, she's suddenly over there. And then after that, she's over there. She's restless, keeps moving around. And she lurks at every corner, waiting for that next victim, waiting for that next young man to come along. So we can see that both in chapters 5 and 7, we see this description of this adulteress. And it gives us instructions and warnings about this wayward wife, about things that we can do. First thing is, he says, stay away from her as far as possible. And not just in this instance, but with all folly, with all of our sin. We should be running as far away from that as possible. And where do we run to? We can run to Jesus. We can run to God. And He can help us. Because He'll make our path straight. And He'll help us. And if we're staying as far away from her as possible, then we're also going to be avoiding her house. He's saying here, don't go anywhere near her house unless you be drawn in and then trapped. I love the language here that the writer uses. He says, drink from your own cistern, not from anybody else's. Basically what he's saying here is, enjoy your own wife. Drink from what you have at home. Don't be going out and seeking it elsewhere. See, because the adulteress, she's just going to offer it out there in the streets and the public squares, enticing anybody, luring them in, which will only lead to their destruction. The writer here says, stay away from that. Stay at home. Enjoy your spouse. Do everything you can to make that marriage work. And he also says, don't let your own cistern flow out into the streets and squares. In other words, keep it at home. Again, enjoy your marriage. Enjoy your spouse. And live with them. And finally, seek out wisdom and drink from her springs. Because, see, wisdom's not going to steer you wrong. Wisdom's feet don't go to death. Her path doesn't go to the grave. Quite the opposite. Wisdom will lead you to life. I mean, that's quite a picture there. A contrast between wisdom and folly. And of course, if there are consequences if we don't follow these teachings, right there, Proverbs tells us we can lose our strength, our years, our wealth, and yes, we can even lose our honor. How many times do we hear in the news somebody well-known strays outside their marriage? And what happens? They can lose everything. And especially their honor. And if you take what is not yours, you can and you will lose all that is yours. I'll say it again. If you take what is not yours, and I'm not just talking about the adultery here, I'm talking about, it could be material possessions. It could be a lot of things that we take that are not ours. And what's going to happen? We're going to lose it all. That's a pretty powerful thing. Pretty powerful warning. Another thing that can happen is you can end up lusting after the beauty of this wayward wife. And you can become captivated by her eyes. And you'll just follow her around to your own destruction. And I love this saying here. Can a man scoop fire into his lap without his clothes being burned? Oh, I know that today we have materials that can keep things from being burned up. But think about it. If you're just wearing your regular clothes and you try to take fire and set it in your lap, what's going to happen? You're going to get burned. And that comes from chapter 6, verse 17. Now, an interesting thing is, in between chapters 5 and 7, we come to chapter 6, and it kind of takes a little different path. It's like it kind of pauses for a moment from talking about the wayward wife, and all of that. But it does give us some things to watch out for, some more folly to avoid. The first thing it says is, avoid making pledges for your neighbor, or you'll be trapped, and you'll be at the mercy of the one that you made the pledge with. Now, this is a little bit different situation than just helping out your neighbor. If you have a neighbor that's in need and you help them out, that's good. And that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to help our neighbors. Jesus even gave a parable about that. And if you're not sure, that's the parable of the Good Samaritan. Because somebody asked him, well, who is my neighbor? And so that's good. It's good to help the neighbor. But what this is saying is that sometimes what they would do is they would make a pledge for a neighbor saying, yeah, I'll give like security for my neighbor who wants to borrow or something. And what ends up happening is the person that they make the pledge with, well, they now have the power over you. And so what they encourage here in chapter 6 is, if you do get trapped, do everything you can to free yourself. And then it gives an example from nature. It says, learn from the gazelle. Because with the gazelle, when it gets trapped, it tries everything it can to get free, and oftentimes is able to get free. And also the birds of the air. When they get trapped, they struggle until they can free themselves, and they can get free from the hand of the hunter. So there's a lesson there saying, if you do get trapped by a pledge because you made a foolish mistake, you're saying, doing everything you can, humble yourself. And do what is necessary to get out of that pledge. It also says, don't be a sluggard. Rise up from your sleep and get to work. Avoid laziness. How many of us have said, well, I just want a little bit more sleep. Just 5 more minutes. I know, I'm guilty of that. But here it's saying, don't allow laziness to come in. Get up and do your work. And it gives the example of ants. It says, take a look at the ants. They don't have a leader. They don't have someone telling them what to do. And yet they get up and they gather their food and they work. So it's encouragement. Don't be like the sluggard. Because poverty will come on that sluggard like a bandit very suddenly. You know, nobody knows when they're going to get robbed. You know, we don't wake up in the morning and say, oh, you know, about 1 o'clock this afternoon I'm going to get robbed. No, we don't know. And so it is like the sluggard. When they're being lazy, when they're not doing their work, poverty is going to come on them. Just like that. We also have warnings to watch out for scoundrels. Scoundrels we know are just worthless men or worthless people. Because they have a corrupt mouth. They wink with their eye, and they signal with their feet, and they motions with their hands. All the while, they are just plotting evil with deceit in their heart. And they stir up dissension. But a warning against scoundrels is that disaster will overtake a scoundrel in an instant, and he'll be suddenly destroyed without remedy. So it says, watch out for them. And don't you yourself become a scoundrel doing these things. So how can we avoid these pitfalls of immorality and folly? Well, the very first thing is to heed these warnings. Listen to these teachings. Remember everything we've taught. Throughout the book of Proverbs, there's warnings about remember the instruction of your fathers, and don't forget the things that you were taught by your mother. So that's the beginning, is get into the Word. Listen to what God is telling us. Listen to the things that He wants us to do. Things like loving our neighbor, doing good for others, living a life that is free from sin. And the interesting thing is that there's three things that these warnings ask of us. Three things that they ask us to do. And the first thing is to practice self-discipline of our desires with that same diligence and hardworking of the hardworking ants. Again, remember, they don't have a leader, but they know what to do. And we should have that same kind of diligence in practicing self-discipline. And we also need to recognize the righteousness of neighborly love. And we need to replace covetousness with contentment. If you remember, it wasn't one of the 10 Commandments, do not covet. And if we're loving our neighbors like we should, we're not going to covet. We're not going to be jealous of them. And we'll be content with everything that we have, everything that God has given us. And the last thing out of these three is we should begin hating the things that God hates so that we can begin to love just like He loves. Now, the interesting thing is that in this chapter, in chapter 6, we see a listing of 7 things that God hates, 7 things that He detests. He detests haughty eyes, lying tongues. How many of us have ever told a lie? Yeah, guilty. Hands that shed innocent blood. A heart that devises wicked schemes. Feet that are quick to rush into evil. A false witness that pours out lies. And a man who stirs up dissension among his brothers. And as I was looking through and studying, I found that there's some other things, some other abominations, other things that God hates. And among these are dishonest scales, again, lying lips, the sacrifice of the wicked, evil thoughts, the arrogant, false judges, scoffers. See, these are the things that God cannot stand. As a matter of fact, He hates them. So we should likewise be doing the same. We should be hating haughty eyes, lying tongues, hands that shed innocent blood, and so forth. Because once we realize the things that God hates, then we can start recognizing the things that God actually loves, the things that He wants us to do. As a matter of fact, this entire book is a love letter that's been written to us, where God says, I love you so much that this is what I'm going to do for you, so that we can have that one-on-one personal relationship. So in these short chapters, which we've just kind of gone over real quick like, I would encourage you, go back, reread those chapters, because there's a lot of information in there about wisdom, about avoiding folly, avoiding something like adultery, or whatever it may be. And when you start searching and seeking out wisdom, you'll find there's a lot of wisdom, not just in Proverbs, but in this entire book. This is the wisdom that God gives us in order so we can make it through this life. And one thing we can see about all of this is that sin is folly. It's a folly that tries to convince any who would listen that it is possible to reach out and take what is not yours. And again, if we take what is not ours, we'll lose everything that is. And remember, wisdom is always calling out for us. And we need to be seeking wisdom and understanding. It's the only way we're going to be able to make it through this life, is to have some wisdom. And if we don't have that wisdom, we can ask God. Solomon did. Solomon says, Lord, I can't do this, and I need the wisdom to be able to lead your people. And you know what? God gave it to him. And when we do embrace wisdom, understanding is not too far away. Because once we have the wisdom and know what to do, then we can begin to understand more and more why it is God wants us to do things the way he wants us to do it. It's not going to come all at once. It's not like we can get on our knees right now and pray, and God's just going to say, okay, boom, you have it all. But over time, and we keep at it, and we keep at it. Keep seeking that wisdom. Keep getting into the Word so we know what it is God wants us to do. So if you're here today and you're wanting to gain wisdom, you want to know more about what it is to be a Christian, a follower of Christ, more about what God wants you to do, you can come forward. We have elders that are ready to speak to you. If you have any needs on anything, if you want to be baptized, the water's ready. So please, don't delay. Come now as we stand and sing.